Student of the Game is on Patreon. If you'd like to support the channel and become a patron for as little as $1 a month, click the link below to sign up. Okay, on to the video. So a while back, I was playing a Sporkle quiz, because, what else are you going to do with your Saturday night, when I came across something that blew my mind. If I asked you to name the Atlanta Brave with the highest WAR season over the past 25 years, you would probably guess someone like Andrew Jones, or Chipper Jones, or any of the 3 dominant pitchers they had in the late 90s and early 2000s. I've been a Braves fan my entire life, and that's exactly where my head went. But no matter which of those future Hall of Famers I guessed, they were all incorrect. Because according to Baseball Reference, the most valuable Brave since the year 2000 is J.D. Drew? I'd like to think that my knowledge of both the Braves and baseball in general are pretty good, but if you'd given me 20 hours or even 20 days to guess that, let alone the 20 minutes that quiz took up, I still wouldn't have gotten that right. J.D. Drew? The guy that we traded Adam Wainwright for? I mean, I remember him hitting a bunch of home runs that year, but we've had guys win MVP since then. Multiple All-Stars, defensive wizards. Surely one of them had this guy beat, but no. J.D. Drew and his 8.3 WAR in 2004 take the top spot. The realization of which sent me down a rabbit hole that I'm only just now emerging from. 8.3 WAR is a colossal number. In most seasons, or at least most seasons that Barry Bonds isn't involved, that's good enough to win MVP. 8.3 WAR is Ohtani and Trout territory, but how did this happen? Oh, okay. I get it now. J.D. Drew's 2004 was a classic example of what's known as a walk year, a time when a player only has 1 year left on their current contract and free agency is on the horizon. The theory goes that in order to maximize their earning potential, players will ball out in the final year of their deal, and there are some very high-profile cases that back this up. For instance, Aaron Judge just turned his 2022 MVP winning season into a 9-year, $360 million contract in his first time as a free agent. If you want a slightly less contemporary example, then you can look back to 2004, when Adrian Beltre hit 48 home runs and accumulated 9.6 WAR in a season that earned him a huge contract with the Mariners that offseason. Examples like these have become so common that the idea of a contract year has become part of our sports vocabulary. It even has its own Wikipedia page. That means it's gotta be legit, right? Well, maybe, but there's also every chance that it's just one of those sports myths that get perpetuated over the years because no one's really tested it. So today, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Put the idea of a contract year under the microscope by doing some good, old-fashioned data analysis. It's not gonna be the most comprehensive stats discussion you've ever seen, but we're gonna do our best with the information we have available to us. Here's how this is gonna work. I'm gonna take you through the entire process, from setting our parameters and choosing our sample, all the way up to interpreting the data we collect. If everything goes according to plan, then we should be able to see whether or not there actually is a significant difference between a player's performance in the final year of their contract as they're about to hit free agency and all the other years. But first things first, we need to define what we mean when we say contract year. On the surface, it seems pretty straightforward, the year before a player hits free agency. But baseball contracts are kind of weird. There are arbitration deals, extensions, trades, and player and team options to consider that make what should be a pretty black and white concept a lot grayer than you might think. So for our data set, we're going to define a contract year as either the last season of a player's arbitration deal or the year before they hit the open market as a veteran. The plan will be to collect all the contract information of a group of players of our choosing, and then examine the difference in performance, which we're going to measure through WAR, between those contract years and all the other years they've played. If our hypothesis is that a player will perform better if he's in the last year of his deal, then the data should reflect that. But the validity of our information is going to depend largely on which players we choose to study. Every Major League Baseball team, of which there are 30, carries an active roster of 26 players, meaning that at any given time on the MLB calendar, there are approximately 780 players currently active. And you might look at that and say, well, there you go, just look at all of those guys' contracts and you'll be set. But there are a couple of reasons that may not be the best approach. First, it's going to take forever, and second, while it may be the most comprehensive way to collect our data, it may not be the most appropriate for what we're actually looking at. A lot of those guys will still be on their first contracts or in the middle of their arbitration years, or in other words, never been eligible to reach free agency in the first place. Those 780 players are the population of Major League Baseball, but to do this correctly, we need to choose a sample that will hopefully reflect both the character of that larger group and the more specific aims of our investigation. There are any number of ways that you could justifiably do this, but here's how I thought about it. A good sample needs to be about 10% of your population, which in our case would be right around 78 players. So just to be safe, I took 50 of the highest paid hitters and 30 of the highest paid pitchers to be a part of my dataset. These are the players who are the most likely to have signed multiple contracts, which will give us multiple points of reference in terms of the actual effects of contract years, and they're typically older, which will give us more data points to include in our analysis. Higher paid players are usually better, just as a general rule, but while Ohtani and Verlander and company are absolutely in here, once you get out into the 70s and 80s, you're in like Michael Conforto or Jose Barrios territory. This list has the greats on it, but it also has some slightly less greats, and at least a few goods to decents that just happen to get big contracts. To me, this group was the best balance of guys who have gotten the kind of mega contracts that our question is concerned with, but also have the chance of being just guys. They did have to be healthy guys though. If a pitcher made fewer than 10 appearances or a hitter played fewer than 50 games, I tossed those data points out. I also got rid of everyone's 2020 season where there were only 60 regular season games. From there, all that's left to do is the incredibly tedious process of manually keying into everyone's WAR ratings for basically their entire career, until we end up with this. This is a graph of how the top 10% of Major League Baseball have performed relative to the number of years remaining on their contract. On the x-axis, you have the amount of time left on a player's deal, and on the y is their WAR for that season. Now, let me point out a couple of things about this chart. What this graph is technically measuring is the relationship, or correlation, between time and player value, not the specific effect of the contract year phenomenon. That relationship is portrayed by this line right here, which is known as the line of best fit, which shows the degree to which one variable might be able to predict another, which in this case is only about 5%. There isn't much of a correlation overall between contract length and production, but if you look at the averages of those contract lengths individually, then things do start to get a little more interesting. Contracts with 1 year left on them account for a higher WAR value than any other contract length in our dataset, and an entire win above replacement more than deals with 2 years left. Is that enough to definitively say that players perform better in contract years? No, and honestly, even if the data was super conclusive, we still couldn't say anything definitive because correlation doesn't equal causation. But there are differences, however slight, in the performances of players in contract years versus other years in pretty much every scenario I looked at, in addition to some pretty notable case studies of this same thing. Take Garrett Cole, for instance. Can you guess which one is the contract year here? I'll give you a hint, it's the really big one. After posting a career-best 6.6 WAR and finishing second in the Cy Young voting in 2019, Garrett Cole got a $324 million deal from the Yankees. How about Anthony Rendon? Yep, that season where he and the Nationals won the World Series may not have gotten him that big contract with the Angels alone, but it certainly didn't hurt. You could say the same thing about Steven Strasburg, now that I'm thinking about it. And just to put some numbers around something that we talked about earlier, here are Adrian Beltre's numbers in the 5 seasons before he signed with the Mariners, and then 5 years after. You might notice a slight difference. And look, anytime you have this kind of discussion about data, you have to be thinking of other factors that could be affecting your information other than the one you're studying. For example, Albert Pujols' production dropped off a cliff after he signed with the Angels in 2012, but that may have had just as much to do with him being 32 at the time as it did him getting paid. Age is a big thing to consider here, in both directions. Players that are reaching the end of their arbitration deals and about to enter free agency are also usually about to enter their athletic prime, when you'd expect their production to be at its absolute highest. Another thing is injuries. Players who sign long contracts tend to be older, which means they're more likely to get hurt, which will obviously limit their ability to produce. Several of these examples, including JD Drew, weren't of guys suddenly getting good in a contract year, but instead of finally getting healthy for an entire season. Could they have been motivated to play through more pain than they would normally? Maybe, but also maybe not. Motivation is kind of a hard thing to try and pin down because everybody's different, and different kinds of people are motivated by all kinds of different things. People's life experiences, genes, and environment all contribute to the kinds of things that motivate them to behave in a certain way, but for our purposes, motivation breaks down into 2 main categories. People who are motivated by the idea of an external reward, like a big fat contract for instance, are said to be more extrinsically motivated. But some people feel rewarded by performing the behavior itself, instead of what they think it might get them. This type of person is intrinsically motivated, and won't be as influenced by things like praise or pressure. Neither one of these things are inherently good or bad, they just kind of are, but I do think they could help us figure out this whole contract year thing. What's our verdict going to be here? Well, the data doesn't show a ton definitively, but One thing I took away from studying it is that while the contract year phenomenon doesn't appear to be reflective of everyone broadly, it does, at least statistically, seem to have been a potential factor in more than a few cases. Somebody like Nick Castellanos, who had the best 2 seasons of his career up to the point right before he's about to hit free agency.
Coincidence? I think not!
I can't say for sure if that's what he was thinking when he was doing all that, but after looking at the data, I'm comfortable saying that it is at least plausible. There is a slight increase in performance in the final year of a contract, at least among the top players, and something's got to account for that. The money being thrown around these days is such that it very well could be a desire for a giant deal that's driving these big seasons. But it could also not be that at all, which I know isn't the most satisfying way to end the video, but hey, that's science for you. One thing that I both love and hate about the research process is that there are about 100 different ways that you could have tried to answer this question, and done a totally valid and thorough investigation of. I walked you through my method, but it wasn't perfect. There are people out there with a lot more expertise and resources than I have who've looked into this kind of thing already, and I would encourage you to seek out their work. We may even have some of them come on the channel one day. And look, you may not be as shook as I was about JD Drew's player value stats from 2004, but I guarantee that there's something stuck there in your sports brain that you've always wanted to know the answer to. And if nothing else, hopefully this video gave you the motivation you needed to go seek it out. See what I did there? Anyway, the fact is, everyone's motivations in psychology are different, which I think is reflected both in the data we spent this whole video talking about and the sports world more broadly. Do some players overperform in their contract year so they can get paid? Sure, seems like that might be a thing to some degree, but it's worth taking a closer look at, like about a million other things that we just believe to be true about sports. So keep your eyes peeled, fellow students, because there are a lot more JD Drews out there for us to spend way too much time trying to figure out. Hi guys, so nice to have you here. I'm Will, and this is my channel, Student of the Game, where we dig deep into all the burning questions we have about sports stuff. Well, not all of them, but quite a few of them, including the ones that are submitted by my subscribers, like this one was. I chose to do baseball because there's so much information out there on it, but I would love to see an analysis like this done on contracts in other leagues. If you enjoyed the content, please do leave it a like and subscribe to the channel, or even sign up for the Patreon using the link below. We'll be revisiting this topic with an actual researcher here in a few weeks, but we'll have at least one more episode come out before then. For today though, I'm Will, and I'm all done. See y'all next time.